What's going on, good people of the internet? It is time for ComicsUnmasked.com's flagship podcast, Panel to Panel, where a bunch of folks shoot the breeze and talk about comic books and such. Wow, that's gonna take getting used to, because yes, as most folks know, that we have recently gone through a rebranding. On ComicsGround.com is no longer, and now we are Comics Unmasked. We are trying something brand new, trying to make it a more blatantly that we are trying to be the place that unmasks everything, that shows the truth, that gets to the heart of what matters about comic books. Whether it's trying to give creators a platform to talk about what matters, whether it means giving anybody a chance to talk about what matters, whether it be someone who's never read a comic before or someone that's read every comic in existence before, we will give them a chance to show what they care about and what matters to them when it comes to the landscape. Like Stan Lee always says, that every comic is someone's first, and we will get to the heart of that with this rebranding. And this is our flagship show, Panel to Panel, where a bunch of folks shoot the breeze and talk about comic books and such. We, every week when we can, we try to make it every week. Sometimes stuff happens and it makes stuff complicated, but we try to do every week where we sit down, talk about our favorite books, or talk about our favorite books turning into comic book media. We try to talk about it and get to the heart of what we care about. My name is James Portis. I am here by myself this week, but not really by myself. Mary and Travis are not here. I got the opportunity to sit down with acclaimed writer of books such as Excellence, Noble from Catalyst Prime. Currently at DC, he is writing the Milestone book Hardware, as well as working on the Milestone animated movie that is releasing. He is also working on Aquaman, The Becoming, as well as the upcoming ongoing series Aquamen. This is the amazing writer that I'm privileged I got to speak to, Brandon Thomas. He has been grinding in this industry for a long time now, and I am so just in love with what he has created and what he has given me. As previously discussed on a previous episode with the release of Aquaman, The Becoming #1, I was floored with the ability that Jackson Hyde finally got to be in the spotlight in the way he is. And thankfully, after a long time coming, we finally get to sit down with Brandon Thomas and talk about basically everything. What drives him in terms of comic books, everything from his book Excellence that I fell in love with from issue 1, and what mattered to me most was talking about Jackson Hyde Aquaman and what is coming in the future for him. I'm excited that I got to sit down with this amazing man and what he brings to the table. You can make sure that you can pick up everything that he is working on right now as it releases. There's some amazing things coming out from this man, so please check it out at your local comic book shop. Pre-orders matter, so make sure that you pre-order these books, because that way you can pick them up at your local comic book shop. I say every week as my closing statement, please support your local comic book shop. That way they get the best help in this current climate, even if it's just their digital platform. Please make sure you support that. But please check out this brand new episode right now. Turn the page with me and check out what we got going on for you. I'll record an intro and outro separately. That way, we can just sort of just jump into everything. But because I got the full agenda listed here. The one thing that I always do when I have somebody on is I want to know their origin story. You hear how'd you get into comics? But no, what really got you into wanting to make this a career? What was that that number? Because straight up for me, when I was a kid, my dad saw me watching the Batman animated series and was like, forget that. I'm gonna go find you a black superhero. He got me Black Lightning #3 that I actually got recently signed by Tony Isabella, which was nuts. But he got me that and told me, here, if you're gonna have a superhero, you're gonna have a black superhero. And then not long after, because he had never been in a comic shop before, he straight up was like, yo, you're gonna. I randomly walked in, some white guy handed me this and he told me, here you go. He came home and I have it here in front of me specifically because you're here. He got me a Hardware #1 that I never took out of the poly sleeve. So it's it was one of those things where he saw that I wanted superheroes to look up to, but they didn't look like me. So it was one of those things that even at a young age, I found that niche. But for you, I want to know about you. What was that thing that got you wanting to do this for the rest of your life?
Well, a little similar story. My father was a huge comic fan. When he was a kid, he used to buy them from the money he made on his paper route. And I
Okay.
think that he was, and he had all of the, all of the originals, Amazing Spider-Man, Kenny X-Men. So I think that he was kind of in a way like emotionally scarred because he didn't hold on to those old
Ooh.
comics.
Ooh, yeah.
And I think that, as an adult, he was always like, oh man, I should have held on to that,
Hmm.
uncanny X-Men.
He'd be rich.
Yes, yeah. And so around that time, I mean, I've been obsessed with Star Wars since the first time I
Mm.
had seen it on VHS at my grandmother's house, and I took the tape from her house, and she never saw it again, except when I would bring it back so that I could watch it, at her house. So for several years, Star Wars on VHS, like it was always with me. Like I never went anywhere, never went to any other like relative's house, like without Star
Excellent.
Wars on VHS. And I was also obsessed with, cartoons at the time, Thundercats, which is still kind
Ooh.
of like my kind of holy grail. I guess my holy trinity would probably be it would be Thundercats, Voltron, and Transformers. Like those were
Okay.
my three, just like greatest of all time. Blah blah blah. So it's I think it's 1992. I don't know what like the trigger was or what he saw in me that was like, okay, it's time now. So he took me to my very first comic store, which is
Okay.
called the Fiction House,
That's
which is
dope.
the name of one of my first Gmail accounts. And I did a blog. An older blog called the Fiction House too. So he took me to the Fiction House, and he basically just let me loose. And there was no limits. Like there were like no
Wow.
price limits. There was no stack limit. So for years, at least until I got my first like real job when I was like 16. So
Hmm.
for those kind of like 3 or 4 years, every month we would go to the comic shop. It was like our monthly voyage or journey
That
together.
is
And
awesome.
I would leave the shop with just a stack of books. So we would go in, and I would buy the stuff I was interested in, which was Batman, anything Batman and Batman related,
Of
and
course.
more specifically, anything Tim Drake related.
Oh
Because
yes. Oh
when I
yes. Mary's gonna
came,
be so upset. Tim Drake is my man.
oh,
Yes.
come on! It's like I don't. It's hard for me to find. It's difficult for me to find people that are just as obsessed with Tim Drake as I am. So basically,
My
when I
first comic series that I ever picked up was Peter David's Young Justice. So
yeah,
Tim
so
Drake, it means
listen,
everything to
so
me.
there are like a few specific comics from that first trip that I remember specifically. Spawn number one,
Oh.
uh, Robin 2, The Joker is Wild, issue 3. And these were the ones with like the hologram cards like on the
Oh
cover. Like I
yeah.
don't know if you've ever seen them.
I've seen those,
And
yeah.
so I remember Spawn number 1, Robin 2, The Joker's Wild, issue 3, which will be very important later, and then Star Wars Dark Empire number 1 from Dark Horse. So
Oh
those
yeah. The Dark
three
Horse books
books,
used to be good, yeah.
yes, they did. So those 3 books I remember specifically from that first trip, and you can kind of trace my kind of comic obsessions, at that time around those books, right?
Hmm.
So Spawn gave me the complete obsession with Image Comics, right? So I came in Image Comics backwards, like I not backwards, but I came into Image Comics
Like you were
with
on the ground
Image
floor,
Comics.
and then you went from fan to actually
So,
like going in there.
not only that, I had to go back to read Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man. I
Okay.
went back to read Rob Liefeld's, X-Force and Jim Lee's X-Men. So I came in with Image Comics. So I had no idea that, these creators had these storied careers at Marvel, and they famously broke away to do their own thing. And I think
Hmm.
it all just really it was perfect for me because everything became a quest right? So
Mm.
I'm reading these Image comics. So then it's like I have to go on a quest to find out like what is Image Comics? Like, like
Right.
what is happening here? Like, where are all these books like on the checklist? Like when does Cyberforce come out? And
Oh,
so it sent me down like the Image Comics rabbit hole, but then it all on the back end, it sent me down the rabbit hole of I want to see all the stuff these guys did before they started Image Comics.
right.
So that led me to Todd Spider-Man and all of those books. And then on the other hand, Tim Drake had just been introduced maybe like a couple of years
Something like
before,
that,
before I had gotten that issue in my hand. So then that sent me on a quest to find every appearance of Tim Drake that existed.
yeah.
And Tim Drake
Wow.
became like my entry character, like into the Batman and larger DC universe, because it's just like this. I just thought he had and we're cussing and stuff, right? So
Oh, yeah, no,
I
no one
just
cares. No
thought
one cares. No one cares.
I thought he had the coolest fucking costume I had ever seen in my life. Like I was obsessed with like the little R like on his chest that he could use like as a throwing star. I was obsessed with his bow staff. Like this, I think this was before Nightwing was carrying like the Eskrima sticks, like hardcore. So he was like one of the first like Batman characters that had like a weapon that had like a kind of like a standard weapon as part of his gear. And I was completely obsessed with him. And then because of that, I became obsessed with the artist that drew some of his first adventures, which was Tom Lyle, Norm Brayfogle. So all of it was so great because I got introduced to these characters, and then that just sent me on a journey, to find everywhere they had appeared before and who had drawn them and who had written these stories. And it was just the greatest. It was the greatest thing. It was just like perfect for me. So it was like I'm reading the current stuff and I'm enjoying that, but then I'm also making lists of all of this other stuff that I have to find in back issue bins, and and it was just it was crazy. It was perfect for me, and it was the perfect time for me to get into it. And basically since that moment, like I've been here like ever since. There has not been a moment like in my life that comics were not like a massive part of the stuff that I was reading, the stuff that I cared about. And so what happened was, after several years of that, and this is kind of funny in hindsight, not funny anymore, but in hindsight, so one of the writers that I gravitated towards was Chuck Dixon, because Chuck Dixon wrote all of those, original like Tim Drake stories, and guest appearances and stuff. And I went to a Chicago Comic-Con. This is before Wizard had taken them over, but I went to Chicago Comic-Con. I think I was about to graduate high school. It might have been like 17 or 18. And at that time, I mean, I already knew I wanted to be a writer. Like I've known I wanted to be a writer for just an extremely long time, like going back to, my first stories were basically in between episodes of cartoons that I loved. So I used to write episodes of like Thundercats and episodes of like Transformers. And I don't know how many times I wrote like new Star Wars trilogies after Return of the Jedi. So, I've been doing this, since I was, basically since I was a child, but doing it in very kind of like child ways, because I don't fully understand what it is I'm doing.
You had to like grow in the style of it.
Yeah, right. And so at the time, when I went to this convention, I thought I was going to write novels, right? So I thought I was going to write, adventure novels, and that was going to be my thing. Like, I'm going to be a professional writer. I'm going to write novels about like, spies and all that cool shit. And I walked into a panel that Chuck Dixon was giving called The 10 Commandments of Comic Book Writing. Oh, wow. And those 50 minutes changed the course of my life. And when I left that panel, I'm like, I'm going to write comics. Like, this is stupid. Like, why have I never thought of this before? Like, I've been reading comics, nonstop for 4 or 5 years, and I had been writing things, constantly. Like, I was I was the irritating kid, like in creative writing class, where the teacher is like, "Oh yeah, we want you guys to write short stories and at least 8 pages," and then like the entire class,
Is groaning.
groans. And when I turn mine in, like my shit is in a binder. Because
see, I'm the same way. I love this. I was the same kid.
So mine is like 40 or 50 pages, so it has to come in a binder because you can't put a staple on it. So that's basically been, me my entire life. But I had never considered, writing comics professionally, and I don't know why. But just in that seminar, it was just like, oh, I'm gonna write comics. Like this is dumb. Like why didn't I think of this before? Mm-hmm. So then I went to college. And college was kind of like I treated college like comics writing boot camp. Mm-hmm. Like so those like years, because I told myself like by the time I graduate college, I want to be published. And so those kind of 4 years of college, on top of all of my regular college stuff, I started finding sample scripts from writers that I loved at the time. One of the first sample scripts I ever got was a Mark Waid Flash script. I don't remember which issue it was, but I got a lot of sample scripts so I could see kind of how the format, worked and how people laid out, pages and pacing and blah, 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 and all that stuff. And then I started writing letters to comics that I was obsessed with at the time. So like, I don't even remember all of the ones that I had published, but I had a bunch of letters published in the back of Robin. I think I had 1 or 2 published in the back of Priest's Black Panther, a couple like the Abnett and Lanning Legion. So there's a bunch of old comics, from that time that have like, Brandon Thomas letters in the back. And so what that did for one of the things that did for me was that it helped me meet editors. So I would have letters published in the back of their books, and then I would go to shows and I would introduce myself. Hey, I'm Brandon. You've published a couple of my letters. I really like what you're doing with the such and such. And then, my thing, what I'm telling kind of aspiring, creators, when you first approach editors, you never ask for jobs or assignments. I always asked for advice. I always said, like, how do I break into comics? Like, what do I need to do? Like, what are the things that, lets you know that like a young kind of untested writer, is ready for the next step. So, we did that for several years. I think halfway through college, I started writing a column called Ambidextrous for a comics news site called silverbulletcomicbooks.com. And I wrote that kind of off and on for maybe, 6 or 7 years. Like it started at Silver Bullet and went to Newsarama for a little while.
Wow.
So, and what the column did was it kind of broadened my kind of contact and knowledge base, because what happened was there were people that were reading my columns and I had no idea they were reading them. So, one of the people that was reading some of my stuff was Mark Millar. This is while he was, I think he was coming off Authority. I think he was doing Ultimates at the time and Ultimate X-Men. And like most of us, I was completely obsessed with the Ultimate books.
Oh, of course.
And he basically became my kind of mentor in a sense, where my editor, the guy that was editing my column, kind of set me up a little bit because he already knew Mark was reading my columns. And so he sent me to Mark to ask him about, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but Mark did a small like Youngblood miniseries that had barely came out. It's called Bloodsport. So when it was announced that he was doing Bloodsport, my editor is like, hey, you should send Mark some questions about, the new book and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, all right, that, I love him. That's fine. And so I reached out to him and he's like, oh, by the way, like I've been reading your column like for the last 6 months. And like, I think that you have a lot of talent and, I think that you should keep at it. And I think that you can, write comics professionally. So for a little while, he basically fronted me to editors at Marvel, and then also Rob Liefeld, and was like, if you're looking for, newer writers or guys that you have books that don't require writers that have like a ton of experience, which turned out to be like kids books and stuff, you should talk to Brandon. Mm-hmm. And my first credit ever was from Rob Liefeld hired me to script this old Youngblood series that Kurt Busiek wrote called Youngblood Year One. Oh, wow. And I think like the mid 90s, and it never came out, and it was just in a shelf. So he hired me to script that Youngblood Genesis as a companion to the Youngblood Bloodsport book he was putting out with Mark.
Oh,
so that was my first published comic, and that was I think it was July 2003. And I've basically been in and out of the game like ever since. Like, so these last few years have been the most kind of entrenched that I've been like as a professional writer, because before, I would have, books come out for like 6 to 8 months, and then I would disappear for a year.
Right.
And then I would come back for a couple of months and then disappear for 6 months. And then so it was very kind of,
what started streaky. That trend for you though? Like, was it just the fact of like waiting for a new project, or was it just like trying to form a new idea?
Oh, you mean like the streakiness?
Yeah, like coming in for a little, because I noticed there was things like Hardcore Reloaded that was a mini series, and then like you would have other things coming through.
That was from, that was kind of from my kind of new age period. But basically what it was that, and this was a mistake that I think that I did make. I was so close to the Marvel and DC kind of, I don't know, ecosystem, churn, whatever you want to call it, that it basically, I should have been putting more attention towards doing my own books, right? My own books, my own ideas, and my own characters. But I was so close. That's one of the very, frustrating things about this whole thing, because you're so close and so far away at the same time, but you never know the difference. It's so hard to figure out exactly where you are. Like, so I had this annoying habit of, I would find an editor at Marvel that he won't mind me using his name, but a guy like Mark Powers. So I would hook up with an editors at Marvel, and they would love my stuff, right? And for like 6 months, I would just keep sending them stuff. I would send them, like plots, script samples, pitches, whatever. And then, that person would leave Marvel or leave, wherever. And basically it would be like going back to square one. And because I wasn't devoting enough time to my own creations and my own properties, I became completely reliant on my relationships with editors at companies, which is a very kind of dangerous spot to be in, because editors can quit, they can get fired, they can be, anything can happen. And most of my early relationships in those days were around, editors. And if something happened to that editor, the relationship is gone. Like, like no editor who's getting let go or leaving, maybe some of them, but not many of them are going to go to, basically like someone that's still working there and is like, oh, I really like working with this guy. Like, you should keep in touch with him. I think he could be good one day.
Right.
So I think that was a big mistake that I made in those early days, because I felt like I was so close, right? Because, I was doing like little projects for Marvel, like here and there. And I felt like I was in, right? I felt like my foot was in the door. And so that basically, was like it was a bad decision for me to become so reliant on these very specific relationships at those very specific companies. And eventually it just kind of bit me, and you end up, in the spot that I was at, where I hadn't created anything on my own. editors either were gone or were, no longer viable, or no longer, they weren't in a position to be able to like help me or move me along or kind of train me or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And that kind of like unraveled, it unraveled on me pretty quickly, kind of like in that span between like 2003 to 2006. And then I had to make some big changes. And so the big change that I made was I had a bad falling out with an editor at Marvel, and it kind of that gave me the impetus to go out and create something on my own. And I co-created The Many Adventures of Miranda Mercury with an artist named Lee Ferguson.
Okay. And I've heard about that book.
And that book basically changed the course of my life again, even on some very like, long-term, long-term footing. So it was, it's just been, it's been a long road. Some of it has been extremely difficult, extremely demoralizing in certain ways, but it was just very important to me that I just told myself like, just don't die. Just like, don't quit. Like, don't let anyone kill you, essentially. Like, don't let anyone kill this dream. And so you just, you get knocked down, you get back up, you regroup, you attack it from a different angle, and then you just keep it going as long as you can. And eventually, for me, I got to the point where I became a little more entrenched, where the kind of contacts and allies that I had were in, certain positions where they were comfortable enough and kind of secure enough in their positions to become like real, true advocates and allies for me, that I didn't always have to worry would be like dropped off a cliff, and then I would kind of go along with them. So that's, I think that was supposed to be the short version of that story, but that
that was still a great story, and it ended up like sort of beelining straight where I wanted to go, which was kind of where you were talking about, where you weren't really creating your own stuff, but then you sort of found this balance where you would create your own stuff, but then you would follow your own dreams and create and get the opportunity to write one of your own Trinity, which I had never knew you wrote this book, because I remember picking up this book at my local library when I was like in high school, and then
Which one was it?
Voltron.
Oh. Yeah,
I found because I was doing my research, like going over everything that I hadn't known that you wrote, and I saw that you wrote the Voltron book that I read as a kid, and my brain just like shattered, and I'm just like, wow, I've been following him for so much longer, and it's just like, it kind of blows my mind how you find that balance of creating your own stuff, but also getting to play in other people's sandboxes. And what is that like for you?
It's amazing. I mean, that's kind of what you want, right? Because when you're doing your own creations, your own characters, you're basically unleashed, right? You are like unfettered, like you don't have there's nothing that says no, right? There's no one that says like, oh, well, you can't do that with the character, or that's gonna, bump up against like long-term plans we have for this character and this other thing. And so I think that it's and again, it's one of those things that, companies, editors, and, potential employers like to see, right? They like to see that you don't need everything. Right. They like to see that.
They want to see you're capable of making something on your own.
Well, yes, making something on your own. And when it's something that you've created, there are no crutches. Right. So, so for instance, I would never aspire to do this, but if I was writing a Batman book and I did a bad job at it, that book would still be profitable. Right. They would still, make money on that book just because of name recognition. Right. when you create something for yourself, you don't have any of that. Like, you don't have anything to fall back on. There's no like, oh, I bought this book because I've always bought this book. It's basically you out on your own. And they, it basically says something. If you can write something on your own, and even if it doesn't sell like great, if you can get it in the hands of someone and they read it and they're like, this shit is good. Like, I don't care if I'm the only person on earth that, that got this, but this shit is good. And it's perfect. This falls into the Miranda Mercury thing. So when I was doing Miranda, I basically carpet bombed like DC and Marvel with samples of the book. So like when the book came out, I basically sent it to anyone that I had ever had like any conversation with at any major company. And at that point, there was actually quite a few people. So that book ended up in a bunch of DC editorial offices. And one of the offices that it ended up in was a guy named Sean Makowitz. And he was like, I don't know if he was an assistant or associate at DC at the time. So he read Miranda Mercury. He had also read Ambidextrous too when I was writing it. So I should, so he had some kind of passing familiarity with me and, whatever. And he, reads Miranda and he's like, what about this guy? Like, why don't we get, Brandon in here and get him working on some, like some one shots, some fill-ins, some annuals. These are like the kind of opportunities that, some of the bigger companies have to kind of try out kind of unproven talent. A lot of what they're doing now is the anthology. They're using the anthologies for that reason too. So anyway, Sean goes in and he's like, what about this guy? Unfortunately, at the time, and I'm not going to tell this story, I had basically had like a falling out with a pretty serious power player at DC Comics over a fill-in issue of Robin that I got to write. So, because of that, I couldn't work there, right? So I wasn't allowed to work at DC. For I mean, you don't have to do the math, but if
it's been a minute.
If someone is enterprising, you could go back and kind of see who might have been there then that's not there now. And
totally get it. Totally.
But we're not going to get into that. So anyway, Sean wasn't allowed to hire me at DC when he was at DC. So fast forward 3 or 4 years later, Sean's not at DC anymore. Sean's at Skybound. He's at Skybound Entertainment. He's now editor-in-chief or senior editor or whatever his title was. He's at Skybound, and Skybound wants to branch out and start producing more books by other creators, probably so they're not as reliant on Kirkman's. I'm not sure, if that was...
As someone who has a vendetta against Kirkman for trying to carry the entire weight of Image on his back, I appreciate you making that reference.
Well, I mean, that was, for several years, that was the job. That was, the job of that book to carry Image. But anyway, I love Robert. Robert's one of my biggest friends and advocates in the game. But at the time, Skybound wanted to branch out. They're like, let's do some more stuff. Like, let's find some, some other creators and put out some, some other books. And Sean remembered me from his DC days and not being able to hire me. So then Sean reached out to me and he's like, hey, look, I love Miranda Mercury. I couldn't work with you then. I want to work with you now. And that moment changed the course. That moment basically put me where I am today, because Sean was at a good company with good people working at it that were stable in their jobs. So there wasn't a lot of churn, involved. And Sean is still there. Like, I'm still working with Sean. And this was probably in maybe like 2012 or 2013. So basically, Sean reached out to me And the first thing I pitched him was Horizon, even though I did have Excellence. It had a different
I'm waiting on my
name.
I'm waiting on my Kickstarter book. It's fine. We'll get there.
Oh yeah. No, they're actually they're shipping pretty soon. I think if you're in Australia or like South Asia, you probably have yours.
That's already. Not fair, but all right.
Yeah. Because of the supply chain issues, they had to do like a staggered ship, which they did not want to do. But I think they should be here. I think we're expecting them before the end of the year.
Okay.
So crossing fingers. So it should be in the next month or so.
Well, like the Kickstarter's last update said October, and then I had to move, so I emailed the manager and had them change the address for me.
Yeah.
And now we're still waiting at the end of November, and I'm just like, I need it, but it's fine. Yeah, we'll get to Excellence.
I think they may be here pretty soon, But yeah, so I pitched him Horizon and he loved it. And then that became my first, Skybound / image book. Okay. And then from that point, everything kind of, fell out of that. Like Horizon ended, but we still loved working together. So then I pitched them Excellence, and then they offered me Hardcore. And then it just kind of went out from there. And once Excellence came out, that basically changed the entire game. Me. Like once Excellence came out, then conditions at DC had changed. Certain people that were gone were, good and gone. And so
you just gave me what I needed, but that's fine.
The door reopened there, and so I've been having a great time doing stuff with them. And I worked for IDW, like actually on a project that is never going to come out. It was attached to a movie whose release got messed up because of the pandemic. So we were working like on a prequel comic to like a movie that we weren't sure when it was going to come out or in what format. And so,
tragic.
Basically I've had a pretty exciting run these last, 3 or 4 years.
That's what's up.
Continuing to do Excellence, and then also doing kind of, projects spinning out of that. Most of them for DC. So DC has turned into home base for a little while, and I'm really, enjoying the opportunities there. I love the editors that I'm working with, very, very supportive, and it's been great. It's been a pretty great run these last 4 years. I did Lion Forge's flagship book.
Oh yes, it was so good.
With my old friend Joe Illidge. Illidge was actually edited Miranda Mercury, and so we know each other from way back. And it's just one of those things where it's a good reminder that you never know what's coming next, and it's a good reminder to not be an asshole, because you just don't know. You don't know what's coming in your future. Like you don't know who's going to get into, jobs, at certain times and be able to offer you, resources or opportunities. So, you'll never get it. You never get it 100%, obviously. People are people, but if you can, I've tried to make it a point. I started my ambidextrous column in 2001. And that was basically 20 years since I started that column, and I've tried to always be very very professional, very reasonable, and very it's not hard for me because I love comics. I love comics so much. I just love not everything about them, obviously, but, structurally and business practices, blah blah blah. We can talk about that forever, and that's not just a comics problem. That's more of a kind of a larger entertainment problem, kind of exploitation and stuff like that. But the actual I love the process. I love writing script. Well, I don't like writing scripts. I like finishing scripts. When I'm writing it, sometimes I don't enjoy it because it's just like, this should be easier. I should be faster. Like this dialogue should be better. So I enjoy having finished scripts and turning them in. Like it's the best feeling in the world to have turned something in. And then I love to watch a comic take shape. Like I love to see, the pencils and then the inks and then the colors and the letters. And I love the whole process of like watching the whole thing kind of come alive. And I like this idea of working and, for me, it's always like a sports analogy for me, and a lot of different things to me turn into sports analogy. So I like working, with this little team, and that's how it was when we were making Excellence. We had a feeling, right? You're working on something, and you're just like, first of all, you have a feeling about the quality of it, and then you have a feeling about the necessity of it. Mm-hmm. And when we were working on that book, I mean, we're still working on it, but when we were working on it and no one knew that it fucking existed or what it was, we just had a feeling. It was just like, it feels like
this is going to change the game kind of thing.
This book. It feels like comics needs this book. Right. And it felt to me like as a writer, it felt like the culmination of everything that I had done up to that point. Like it felt like a natural progression, from, I'm probably drawing the line in the wrong order, but, from like Miranda Mercury to Voltron to Noble to Horizon to it all felt like it was on a line, right? And it was all leading me to excellence. And at that, and without getting too, without patting myself on the back too hard.
No, like it's a great book.
It felt like I was at the height of my power, right? It felt like I know how to write this book. Like I know what this book is about. And it's one of those things, one of those decisions that, you look back on and you're like, oh, I'm glad I made that decision. Like, I'm glad I pitched Skybound, Horizon, and not Excellence.
It needed time.
At that time, I didn't know how to write Excellence yet. Like, I wasn't there yet. I wasn't developed. I had never done like a monthly comic before, or a comic that had, gone past. I think my longest is Horizon. Horizon went 18 issues, but it could have gone way past that. But an important lesson I learned from Horizon is I went into Horizon thinking I was going to write 50 to 60 issues. So it's paced that way. Like it's a very kind of like deliberate, comfortable pace that book is operating at, that it shouldn't have been on, because I was never going to get to that point. So I write Excellence like the house is on fire. Like that's how Excellence is written. Excellence is written like it's going to end at any moment. Like, I know, where it ends, and we're going to reach that point, thankfully. But that was an important lesson that I learned from Horizon, because in my head, I thought I was writing my Vertigo book, right? And all classic Vertigo books are 60 issues. So in my head, I'm like, this is going to be like 60 issues or something. And because of that, there were cool things about Horizon that no one ever got to see, because they were like planned for like year 4. So when it came time to do Excellence, it was like, let's just imagine there isn't going to be a year 4. So write the tightest, leanest, meanest version of this story possible. And if you have the opportunity to do more, you always leave things in place where you can do more. There are more stories to be told. There are more characters we want to explore. But if we only got, like X amount of issues of this book, would you be satisfied? So write kind of like the shortest, tightest, most concise version of this. And what happens is everything moves faster. Everything is more intense. Everything is more immediate. Everything is more important. And you can feel that in the storytelling. Like it feels like the whole thing is just going to come apart like at any moment. And those are the things, from reading comics that keeps you coming back to a comic, like that kind of feeling.
Exactly.
And that here's the feeling: there is urgency. There is urgency.
Like any issue could be the penultimate issue, so you have to plan that ahead of time. Kind of feeling.
And it's just even if it's not that, it's supposed to feel like that. And when you tell yourself you don't have 60 issues, it gives you like an intensity that that I think that you can see in the work, because that it's not it's not patient. There's nothing. Every single scene that is in the book like has to be in this book like in this specific spot at this specific time. So that's really kind of how things evolved. And then once Excellence came out, that completely changed the perception of me as a writer. And when Excellence came out, people are like, oh, he's good, he's ready. And I might have been ready before. I was ready before, but there's like ready, and then there's ready. Like, the more you do it, the more experience that you get, you just become more ready. So, that's kind of how I got back into DC. When I was at DC before, I wrote one issue of Robin. I think it came out in maybe 2007. It was Robin issue 167. Yeah. And, I was ready then. And if I had gotten into DC then and had like a little kind of more seasoning, I think it could have worked out. But at this point, it was like, I just need like a little seasoning. Like back then I needed like a ton. And that's something else that an editor is always looking at. Like, how much time is it going to take me to do this book with him? Like, am I going to have to like, rewrite and replot and like, basically, am I going to send back a script to him that's just like all revisions? It's just like, oh, we need to do this better. We need to do this better. This doesn't work. Cut this panel here. Like because you want being an editor for, a comic book company, especially one of the majors, is, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. There is no company, there's no publisher out there that has the exact amount of editors that they need to for all of their projects. They just don't. Maybe Skybound, but other than them, no. Everyone is overworked, and everyone is kind of basically being pushed to the limit. And you basically want your script to present the least amount of problems and notes for them, so that they can get back to any of the 800 other things that they have to do. So, that's the goal, is to, like, don't create don't create too many additional problems, for your editor.
Okay. So from here, I have like 3 blocks that I want to cover. Like specifically, and I want to rewind a little bit to Excellence, because you basically gave the groundwork of how the book came about and what it sparked that change for you. But I honestly, the book means so much to me, to the point that I did fund the Kickstarter. So like, I really want to highlight this book that like no one seems to appreciate, but then like there's that core audience that gets it, because like when we were kids, everyone would like wanted there to be like a black version of Harry Potter that you could look like see and actually matter. Like the freaking Dean Thomas jokes were afoot everywhere. But then you went above and beyond that and made it so much more. Like you said, okay, we're gonna have wands, we're gonna have magic, but then we're gonna make it the secret society that protects everybody and makes it more than that. Create this entire mythology. Like there's even hints of sexism throughout the entire thing. It has has the entire black like family structure and the toxic masculinity baked into it that you can teach like young black men to appreciate. And I just like, where do you get off having that much power in one? Like the first issue alone, like how do you do that?
Well, let's say, okay, I'll say it, honestly, and this is, like no bullshit. The first issue of Excellence is one of the best things that I've ever written.
I agree.
Like easily, it's one of my favorite scripts. I want to say every once in a while, it makes it sound like I suck, but every few scripts, you'll get one and you'll be like, okay, this is it. This is it. This is the shit. Like I can feel this working. Like this is doing exactly what I want it to do.
Right.
And for me, when it came to excellence, the key of it, and also the thing that makes it kind of uncomfortable, excellence is, I don't want to say it's me, but it is me. It's like I have my best friend, read the book, and this was his like commentary. He says, "This is the most Brandon thing ever." And it took me a while because there's a lot of me in Miranda Mercury. I'm in everything, right? I'm in Voltron.
Like you put yourself in the
I'm in Noble. Just the way that I feel like the world is supposed to be and the world is supposed to operate, and the way that people are supposed to treat each other, and the importance of friendships and loyalty and all of that stuff is baked into kind of everything that I'm doing. But for excellence was very, very personal to me, because I won't say for the most part, the relationship between Spencer and his father is unfortunately the relationship between me and my father.
Hey,
and
same.
So it took me a long time to get to the point where I was comfortable putting that stuff out there. I mean, there was a point where, where my mother would like read the issues and she would be like, "Why did you put that in there?" Right? Because there are like specific scenes that obviously the kind of magical trappings and stuff of it are not true, but things that happened, feelings that I had, kind of like about and during our relationship, it's in the book. It's there. And I feel that makes the book, it makes it feel more real. I mean, that's what we mean when, and let me say, that excellence is real tagline is also one of like my masterpieces. I typically suck at writing taglines. I just do. But for some reason, that excellence is real thing came very early, and it stuck. Because like that's what the book is, and to me, it means 100 different things. But what that means to me is that the relationships and the emotional stakes and kind of the emotional damage that some of the characters have, unintentionally done to each other is real. That shit is real, and a lot of that book is lived in, by me. But the cool part is that I'm doing this book, and then there are parts of it that Kari is living in. There are parts that Emilio is, like our relationships, like with our grandmothers, were like all very, very similar.
Oh, that first issue.
One of those things where, initially it came from me, but that experience was shared by a lot of the people that I was even working with at the time. So that is what made us feel like, oh, we've got something here. Because if I'm writing something, if I write the haircut scene, let's talk about the haircut scene. The haircut scene in issue 1 is basically like one of the most memorable scenes in that script. And Kari has said, that's why I did this book. When I got to the haircut scene, it was just like, okay, yeah, this is the book I should be, devoting several years of my life to illustrating. And I wrote that scene, and it was very, personal for me. But then when Kari got it, he was like, it was the exact same way. Like I had like almost the exact same story and relationship, with the book. I mean, there's also like an emotionally kind of like wrenching scene in Excellence 3 where Spencer goes and visits, Gigi, and he basically kind of enchants her, basically, so she like comes back to herself. And Kari, I don't know if it was his grandmother or basically Kari had a relative who had Alzheimer's. So Kari like drew that scene like in tears. And there's just so many just little things like that. And it's been such an amazing experience because I've been able to learn about Kari, doing this book, and learn about Emilio during this book, and things about our lives that, we all grew up in completely different places with some similar family structures, but there are like things that were universal in our relationships that were reflected in this book. And that's why we felt like there is something here, because we are like three or four. I shouldn't exclude Darren. So we are like four random dudes, completely different families. We're not the same ages, but there are stories, there are things that are happening in this book that we can all project, onto our own lives. And that's why we just thought, we were like, there's something here. We feel like there's something here. And beautiful. To have that book come out and to have the response to the book has just been enormously gratifying, not just as, like a writer and I created it, but it's just as a human being. I mean, some of the mail and stuff that we get for this book and because of this book has just been really affirming.
Oh yeah, really, no, I remember when the book first came out, and it was like, I remember I saw this solicitation, I was like, there's no way this is happening in Image. There's no way this book exists. And because it was on the time Bitterroot was coming out, and I saw this, and I saw this book coming out, and I'm just like, how does this exist? There's no way. Because I remember how great Kari's artwork looked and other things that I'd seen him in, and I remember you from Noble, so I'm like, this can't be. They couldn't have put these two together. It's not possible. And then I sit down and I read it, and I'm just like, oh my God, my heart is breaking. Like, I feel all this pain of trying to exist and be around my father, and you tore my heart out, and it's like I own every issue now because you keep pulling me back.
Oh my God, oh man, the next issue when 12 comes out, it's just gonna.
Literally,
emotional destruction.
That was the one thing when I moved recently. I went to the nearest comic shop and I was like, I don't know what else is coming out, but Excellence, every Milestone book, and Aquaman, I need you to put them on my pull list. And then they were like, all right, bet. So it just that right there, you have harnessed that, and you've created that kind of passion, and when everywhere else in the industry it doesn't feel like it's there, and it's just and then you go from this book and you get your hands on literally my favorite comic character of all time, Jackson, because we did an episode tribute for the first issue that came out a while back, and I talked about how when I was a kid, I was picking up every issue of Aquaman just I liked the character, me being a mixed kid in the comic shop, everyone would just take me as the black kid and I appreciated it and whatnot. I'm sitting here and loving Aquaman, and then he dies during all the crisis nonsense, and then Blackest Night comes out, and then Brightest Day comes out, and then Jackson walks in, and I'm like, what? They put me on the page with my favorite superhero. Oh, okay, yay! And then he just disappears for 6 years, and I'm like, wait, come back! And I'm seeing him on Young Justice, and he's here, and he's in this new form, and then and then Jeff Johns spits him back out in Rebirth, and then Percy writes him for a little bit, and then my friend Jordan writes him for those couple issues for Kelly Sue
during Kelly Sue's run,
and then you. I don't know what you did, but then you just just you in Future State made him everything that I ever wanted him to be.
Dude, listen. Okay, I talk about Excellence 1. That first Future State script is also just wonderful. I felt powerful when I wrote that Future State script, and the story to that is so hilarious. So I'll try to tell the short version, but it's me, so it won't be short.
Oh, that's cool. No, I don't got a time limit. I'm here. Let's do this.
Yeah. So I am I got in touch with editor named Andrea Shea. So Andrea
I love her.
knows
She's amazing.
I love her too.
She will be getting a shout out in the tweets
She's
because
so
I love her
great.
to death.
So she's I think she's pretty close with Kari, or close with Kari, or Kari's girl, or both of them, or one of them. I'm not sure. So anyway, when the last con that I did before the world just blew up, it was New York Comic Con, and I forget which year it was. Basically, it was the year that Excellence had launched, and it was the first time that I met Emilio and Darren in person. Like, I met just at like earlier shows, and we knew of each other, and obviously we had been working. We knew of each other, and we had both had a Skybound connection. So he had done a bunch of stuff. He's actually one of Robert's like oldest friends in comics. Like, Robert and Kari did an issue of Sleepwalker, I believe, for Marvel Comics that no one remembers except for them and me. And so they have always been close. So Kari's always doing something at Skybound. Like, he did Tech Jacket for several years. He did a couple of short Invincible stories. And I was working at Skybound doing Horizon, and we're putting Excellence together, me and Sean Makowitz. And he's like, we're talking about artists, and he's like, what about Kari? I was like, Kari's not gonna draw this. And he was like, yeah, but I was like, Kari would be amazing. Like, Kari Randolph is like exactly who we want on this book. The book will look right. The fashion will be on point. The kind of New York, kind of Brooklyn state of mind will be on display everywhere, which is exactly what we want. But it was just like, Kari's not gonna do this book. Like, this is, I don't think we can get him. And Skybound has this habit. Anytime I tell them that I don't think we can get someone,
it happens.
They basically they think that that's a challenge, right? So when I was doing Hardcore Reloaded, they were like, who do you want on covers? I was like, well, we can't get him, but I would love Nick Klein. I would love Nick Klein. Like, I love what he did on Drifter with I think Ivan Brandon wrote that book, but it's just a luscious, gorgeous, like, space sci-fi mystery thing with like cool aliens, and I just loved it. So I'm like, I would love to get Nick Klein, but we can't get him because I think he was at Marvel at the time. He might have been drawing Captain America. I think this is before he did Thor with Donnie, which I think he's still doing. But I was like, we can't get him. And they came back and they're like, we got Nick Klein. Now what? So, that always happens with Skybound. So that was one of those things where I just told Sean, I don't think we can get Kari. I don't think we can get him. And so Sean basically made it his mission, like, oh, we're going to get Kari. So, he put us on the phone together. We had a nice conversation. Then he read the first script, and then, the rest is history. So anyway, he's good friends with Andrea Shea. And so at that same show that I met the rest of the Excellence team, I also met her. And she was like, you need to be working at DC. I was like, yeah, I agree, but I can't work at DC right now because of such and such. And so, fast forward maybe I want to say 5 to 6 months later, the such and such was no longer in play. And then Andrea is like, let's get it. So I was like, okay, all right. So it's funny. So Andrea brought me back in, but before we actually had the chance to work with each other, I did some smaller projects for like other people. So I did like the first thing I did when I kind of, came back to DC, I think it was an 8-pager. I did one of those short stories for one of the anthologies, and it was an Aquaman Frankenstein team up. And so I was like, oh, that's awesome. I was like,
that is very awesome.
Absolutely want to have, Aquaman on Mars. And then that, baby ant, it turned into this whole kind of like adventures in babysitting thing where like Arthur Arthur Sitter cancels on him, so he has to bring Andy with him to Mars, and then they go on this, adventure together, and it was fun, and I just and I loved it, and
I remember that book.
It was basically I think the anthology was called like The Doomed and the Damned.
Yeah.
So it was one of those like Halloween theme ones, but I did a story for that. I did a little 8-pager that had Steel in it for it was like Dark Knight's like multiverse of something. It was a cool cover with it was a bunch of like it was like the zombified super pets on it.
Oh,
drawn by Chris Burnham. So I did a Steel story there. I did a little Superman story for the digital first Superman series that was coming out. I really love doing that stuff. It's like where the key breaks into the Fortress of Solitude and then like turns it into like a tower of traps for Superman. So he gets back and then he gets depowered. And basically I pitched it as like Die Hard in the Fortress of Solitude. Like a depowered Superman has to survive like, a weaponized Fortress of Solitude. And, but it was super cool. So that's what I did kind of like working up, back to Andrea. And, she was the Aquaman editor at the time, and they were putting Future State together. They were almost done with it. I actually got into Future State pretty late. And so I pitched what you read, basically. I pitched that 2-parter with, Jackson and Andy they're together, and then they're lost, and then they find each other again. That was, that's basically the gist of what the 2-parter is. And she loved it. A bunch of people at DC loved it. And I thought that was going to be like, one of my first kind of major things at DC. And then they decided, you know what? The Aquaman book's going to be canceled. And we don't know if we want to basically like not waste. I shouldn't say waste. That sounds way too harsh. But we don't want to use a Future State slot for a book that we know is already going to be canceled. Right.
Right.
So in the meantime, the Bat Office contacted me and they're like, could you write Future State Outsiders for us and make it real cool and do it real fast, because the person that we had on it didn't work out. So we need something really fast. And I was like, oh, okay. And then that turned into that, cool outsider story featuring, Black Lightning, Katana, the Signal. And that's something that I keep returning back to over and over again. And then, so I'm working on that. The Aquaman thing is dead. And then I think the last issue of Aquaman comes out, and the Aquaman fans basically like erupt.
Oh yeah, no, it was angry.
Like,
it was rage.
It's like, why are you canceling this book? Like, why is there going to be no Aquaman book? From that, from this point on or whatever.
Right.
So then I was already writing Future State Outsiders and maybe something else too. But basically they came back to me and they're like, I know this is going to like drop a bomb into your schedule, but do you still want to do Future State Aquaman? Like, we're back on. Like we're back. And I was like, absolutely. And and so that script was just, I mean, some things you just like feel, right? You just like feel it like in your chest, like when you're writing it, when it just feels like this is so cool and this is working. And then we got Daniel Sampieri to draw it. And then we got my old friend Adriano Lucas to color it, and you'll like this. Adriano colored the Voltron Year One miniseries that I did for Dynamite. And when he did that, he basically became like, I became obsessed with him for life, because I was not getting paid a lot of money to write those scripts. And my goal was like, I'm gonna write this script like they're paying me like $5,000 for it. Like you're not gonna be able to tell like how much I'm getting paid to write this script based on my effort that I'm putting into it. And Adriano was doing the exact same thing, but on the colors. Dang. The colors that he gave to this book were just immaculate. And I'm like, there is no way. I'm like, this dude is working as hard as me, for almost like no money. So like, this is
Right.
a dude that I will lay in the street for like until the end of time. So when Andrea told, and I think Andrea knew this story too. So when Andrea told me that, oh yeah, we got Adriano on the Aquaman, and I was just like, okay, all right, we're about to clown now. So when I wrote my Future State books, when I wrote Aquaman and Outsiders, it was basically from the perspective. This is what I'm talking about: urgency. It was from the perspective. These may be the last DC comics I write for the next, 10 years. Whatever the point of time it was between that Robin issue and here. If I don't write any more DC comics for the next, 10 to 15 years, I want these comics to be memorable. Like, I want there to be scenes and images and moments that people are just like, I want people to remember. You remember when Brandon snapped the fuck off on Future State? That was like my mind state. Like that was how I went into these books.
Love
and
this so
that
much.
First script for Future State Aquaman, it just felt so. I was really proud of it, and I'm, you write a lot of stuff, but there are certain things that are just like, I got everything I wanted. Out of this script. Like, it felt paced correctly, it felt emotional, it felt exciting, and then it started being drawn. Like, then Daniel started drawing it, and it was just like, holy shit, like, this is gonna be, like, I think people are gonna like this. Like, just seeing the pages come back, and then Adriano's cut, man, nobody does skies like Adriano Lucas. I work with some amazing colors, and I'm working with them now. But there is something about what Adriano does with skies. I am always
it's next level.
Excuse to put like, skies or something, into the book. And when, we did this story about, it's basically kind of like parallel realities. They keep going to all these different worlds and interacting with all these different characters. And it just became like, like landscape after landscape after landscape after landscape. And then it's just like what Adriano just does better than everybody else. And basically, the Future State came out, and then it was like, oh man, I don't, like I said, I'm not taking credit for it because I don't know if this is exactly what happened, but it was like, okay, yeah, we need to figure out this Aquaman thing now. Like, we need to figure out like a long-term plan for Aquaman. And then that became, Aquaman: The Becoming and Black Manta, which I think Chuck might have already been attached to already, but it wasn't like this big, it wasn't a big thing yet. And then the idea became, let's do a Jackson Hyde book and get him established, as Aquaman in his own right. Let's do a Black Manta book. And then when we're done, let's smash it all together and then do another Aquaman ongoing. And then that became
everything. And it's like, it was crazy because you kept just adding to the list of things that I wanted to talk to you about the more we were trying to set this up, because it was like, bam, like Aquaman stuff. Then it was like, bam, Milestone stuff. Bam, Aquaman. And I'm like, wait. And it was just like, I kept adding to it. And the biggest question that like I really want to pose, that like when it comes to Jackson as a character, is are we like when it comes to this entire landscape that's sort of like, we don't know if Future State is still going to like be the end goal of DC, we don't know what the timeline is going to be, and the one thing that I really want to know is, are we going to see a Miles Morales effect? And what I mean by that is, we're still living in a universe where Miles Morales just turned, I believe, 10 years old. And we still haven't seen him take the Amazing Spider-Man title from Peter. We are living in a universe right now where Ben Reilly has come back and everyone's groaning. And my biggest fear is, are we going to see that, where we start propping Jackson up to be the successor, and then we still want Arthur to be on the main page because of Momoa or because of this or that, or the white nerds explode in anger about this of having a gay black man be Aquaman. Are we going to see this retread of the same issue that we keep seeing, where we start leaning into the diversity and creating the new generation, and then we back up because of backlash from the vocal minority? Like, I really want to pose that question to you.
Well, okay, here's what I'd say. I'd say that I know everything that you're saying. Like I've been.
It's like it's a hard thing to pose to you because, like, obviously you're not fully in control.
No, it is. But just as a fan, I will tell you my impression, and I will tell you what I think is different now that wasn't before. So, and you post two great examples, right? Miles Morales and let's say Spider-Gwen. I think this is an example that definitely works.
Okay.
When those characters were introduced, there was a lot of backlash to the characters existing, right?
Right.
Just existing. I'm not even talking about, and this is like a larger issue, and kind of like my pet peeve about humanity right now is kind of disingenuousness.
Mm-hmm.
People that know better pretend that they don't, so that they basically can pretend to be outraged by things. Mm-hmm. Like, basically, anyone that knows anything about comics, even on a very base level, knows that the heroes are always dying, getting lost in space, getting their memories wiped, getting their powers taken away, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
The character always comes back. They always come back in almost the exact same form that they were in when they died. Mm-hmm. Right? So personally, I don't have a lot of response to people pretending that they don't know that.
Right.
Let's just say that. Right. When Superman was killed,
you had four people stepping up trying to replace him, and then he came back.
People knew he was going to come back. Right. This is some, like, what you have a bunch of comics nerds that are pretending that they're part of the mainstream. Uh-huh. So when Superman is killed to the mainstream, that means he's killed. Mm-hmm. When Superman is killed to a comics fan, they know, oh, this is going to be a story and a whole thing, and then he's going to come back, and then that will be the story. Then it'll be the return of Superman. If Batman gets his back broken, there's going to be like a successor, and there's going to be a whole story, and then something will happen, and then his back will be healed, and he'll come back, and he'll be Batman. Right. So when you have, I'm sorry, this is turning into like a massive.
No, this is cool because I already have like a counter argument to what you're saying, and I want to see how you play this out. This is already
turning into like a massive, fucking tangent. But basically, you have a bunch of people that know comics and know how comics work typically, and they know that those characters are basically going to come back. Mm-hmm. So when you have people that get upset about, Miles Morales, they're killing Peter Parker in a different universe and replacing him with Miles Morales, but the other grown Peter Parker is still Spider-Man, and this is going to continue to be Spider-Man. Mm. And you're pretending that they don't know that, just to generate clicks and to basically pretend that they're like pissed off about something. These people are sad, and they're fucking bored, and they just, to me, if you attack the people that make comics, and if you attack comics, then you don't fucking love comics.
Ooh, so I need that on a shirt.
Then you have a bunch of people that pretend to love comics, and they pretend that they're protecting comics, but it's like, no, you don't. You don't fucking love comics, because if you love comics, you would just love comics. There shouldn't be like an asterisk. I just love comics, as long as the exact same characters are featured, the exact same creators are featured, the exact same things happen over and over. If it's conditioned on things like that don't matter, then you don't fucking love comics. Like, right. If you love comics, you don't attack the people that make comics for, I mean, nobody's buying, mansions out here from like comic strip money. I mean, maybe a couple of us are, but you know what I mean. Yeah. The only thing I will say about that is those are the rules for the big characters. What we're talking about are the rules for the marginalized characters, right? So the rules for the marginalized characters are a little different, but let me see if I can like square this circle. So people, Miles Morales, oh, we're so mad. Oh, like, oh, Spider-Gwen, oh, we're so mad. We hate this book. Why does it exist? So you fast forward, first of all, those characters still exist. They still have their own books. They still have their own prominence. And then you get to the current day, and what do you have now? I have an almost 5-year-old son who is obsessed with Spidey and his amazing friends.
Oh, I love that show.
For that show,
love that show.
Peter Parker, Miles Morales, Gwen Stacy. So what I'm saying is that you endure all of that bullshit on the comic side, which to the corporations, let's be honest, doesn't even fucking matter. So you can get to the point where you're like, okay, we want to make a new, Spider-Man kids show. We want to use the Spider-Man and an Amazing Friends name, so let's put Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy in it so we can have like a well-rounded, developed cast.
Right.
Now, the people that, the money makers, you think the money makers give a fuck about, Comics Gate or all of these, fucking idiots?
They don't care.
They don't care because they need Miles Morales. Like you just have to, it's not just about the comics anymore. It's like, look at the movies, look at the construction of the Marvel Cinematic Universe today versus when it first started with Iron Man. You can see everything they're doing very clearly. Look at all of the Disney Plus shows. Almost every single one of those Disney Plus shows have had prominent female villains. And I'm sorry if I'm like spoiling this for people, but like you have, and I don't know if you're even, caught up on.
Oh, I am. You're good.
But, you have Sylvie, you have Sharon Carter becoming the power broker. You have you have the Countess or Contessa. She's had like 18 different names.
Right.
You have you have a new Black Widow who we're not sure like
what's gonna happen next week.
But right, we're not sure what she's gonna be like the next time we see her. And you can see that now we have Captain Marvel, we have Black Panther, we're getting Ms. Marvel, and all of these things originated in the comics. And you endure all of this kind of noise about this stuff in the comics so that you can get the characters that you need in the entertainment medias that will really, I don't want to say matter because, I love comics more than anything, but you know what I mean.
Right.
Like, there is a future in there being, a Miles Morales, in there being a Duke Thomas, in there being a Jackson Hyde. So when I'm writing Jackson, I don't know what the future of Jackson Hyde is going to be. Like, if I can stay in it long enough, I feel like maybe I can kind of tip the scale in a way, just in a sense to show that this is a really kind of like cool character with a cool history and an interesting kind of emotional kind of stance and viewpoint that I think people can plug into. But there is always, anytime it's us, there's always risk. And
right.
And I would rather, my job is to make it impossible for DC to get rid of Jackson Hyde. Like as one of the stewards of the character right now at this very moment. And again, this is not like just me, right? This is not just my version of Jackson, or this is a collaboration. But when I take on characters like this, when I take on a character like Curtis Metcalf,
we gonna get there. We gonna get there.
Yeah. My job is to make it so you can't get rid of that character. My job is to entrench him into to knit him in the DC universe as tightly as possible, that if I'm not writing Aquaman and whatever it is, let's say 5 years, we'll just throw it out. Yeah, I don't know. It's probably not gonna last that long because comics usually doesn't. But let's say 5 years, I'm not writing Aquaman anymore, and I just go off into the sunset. If I've done my job, whoever comes after me has to deal with Jackson Hyde. They can't just jettison him and put him like in a tube and be like, oh, okay, well, the black writers went away now, so now it's back to whatever. So I just look at it like that. Like I understand the fear, I understand the anxiety that is around these like quote unquote diverse characters, but I think that there is like a pipeline for these characters that didn't exist before, right? Okay. DC is about to do another kids-based Batman show called Batwheel.
That looks so cute. I love it.
It does, and my son is gonna love it to death. And the Robin on that is Duke Thomas, right? So that's why you make these characters, right? You don't just, they're for the comics, yes, but and I'll just say it here personally, right? I want to make sure, and any little thing that I can do to make sure that like Jackson Hyde shows up in the next Aquaman movie or the one after that is basically like what I'm gonna do. Like I always keep that in the back of my mind, and there's always kind of like a respect and a responsibility for these characters that kind of supersedes, like working with other characters, right? I always am conscious of the fact that these are great opportunities, right? And I'm not going to waste it. And my job is to basically make it impossible to do an Aquaman book or an Aquaman family related book that Jackson Hyde is not an immense part of, and like an immense, kind of presence in the book. Like that's my job. That's part of the job, when we're figuring out these stories, figuring out these scripts. I want to you always have to challenge the characters. You always have to put them in situations that they don't want to be in. And sometimes you have to be very cruel to the characters, which sometimes I don't enjoy. Enjoy. There is an upcoming scene in Excellence 12 that I just didn't write for weeks. I just didn't want to write the scene. I just didn't. It was awful and it was heartbreaking. And I just, I didn't want to do it. But eventually it has to be done. The story dictates that it has to be done. But, I am never going to, I'm never going to brutalize or diminish, or I'm never going to do it. Right. Jackson's going to have big problems and big things that he has to deal with, but I am never going to take a black character and I'm not going to degrade. You're not going to degrade any character, but when you're working with the black and brown ones, it's just extra. Like I'm always trying to find ways to, did you read me and Kari's black and white story that we did for Batman?
I did.
Okay. So you'll know that there's a scene in it there's a scene in it where basically Batman has to fight a bunch of, like mind controlled, dudes, like Mad Hatter, has control of them. Now, when I'm writing that script, I'm like, I'm not going to write a script where Batman is beating up a bunch of brothers in a community center.
Oh, yeah, no.
I'm not going to do it.
It can't be
what
done.
do we do instead? We just have Batman just knocking the hats off of the guys. So he's not even fighting the guys, really.
He's fighting the hats.
Yeah, he's just getting rid of the mechanism that's basically controlling their minds. And I'm just talking about different little things like that to me personally matter. That putting that sort of imagery, like I'm not gonna ask Kari Randolph to draw Batman beating up a bunch of brothers.
You can't do it. That would be like horrible optics regardless.
And even, all things are supposed to be equal, and so all things are not equal, right? And that may be okay for someone else to do, but I'm not going to do that. And it's going to be, and I'm not going to hide that I'm doing that. In the script, I'm like, I'm not going to have a scene where Batman beats up a bunch of brothers. So this is what we're going to do instead, and this is going to be just as cool, and Batman is going to look just as surgical and badass as he ever looked, because he knows, oh, these dudes are mind control. So if I knock their hats off, they be good, right? So, I don't have to, pound them, like into the turf to get my point across. So like those little things, those little moments, those like decisions, to me, that's why I'm at DC now. That perspective, that willingness, that additional thought that goes into these things is like, that's why I'm here. I mean, I had a page, and I was finishing up the Becoming 6 recently. And there is a moment where initially Mara like headbutts one of the Black female characters. And I was like, no, let's do something different.
Thank God.
Because the story called for that, right? So the story is like, Mara gets her revenge, right? But when I'm writing it, I'm like, no, that doesn't need to be there. And so I figured out another way to express the same point, but the point doesn't involve a Black woman getting headbutted by a white woman. And obviously in the context of the book, that's not what it is, but visually that's what it is. So, right, it's dealing with the kind of visuals and kind of the larger context of the stories.
Okay.
So, that's kind of how I approach it. So, like I said, I know that was a very long answer to that question.
No, it's cool.
I understand the anxiety, and we are not always going to always get it right. But like I said, my job is to make it impossible for them to get rid of Jackson. Okay. In every scene, every line, every moment, every reveal, every, whatever is with that in mind. Because I know Arthur is fine. Mara is fine. Andy is fine. They will be there. They will continue to be there. And my job, on top of everything else, which we're, trying to accomplish with this book, is to basically stitch Jackson Hyde into the Aquaman book so that he can't be removed. So that if whoever wants to remove him, there's going to be a lot of people that are like, why did you try to take Jackson out of this book? Why are you trying to act like Jackson Hyde doesn't matter? Because we have all of this evidence, from however many issues or whatever, that he does matter. And we like it that he matters. And we expect him to matter now and into the future. So.
Okay. Like that was a great way of answering that question because like obviously you don't know every piece of the board, but the fact that you're willing to fight means a lot. Now, the final piece of of the puzzle that I want to get to because there you just like I said, you kept adding to the pile was
that's what I do.
We had to get to him was Curtis Metcalf. What was literally my man from when I was a small lad. I kid you not, I have number one from the original and number one from that came out recently right here next to me because like just the transcendence that has occurred. And I gotta say, what you have done in these few issues is balls to the wall. What I think like people like Dwayne and Dennis wanted to do back then, and you just kicked it up a notch because you flat out like went to the pavement. You made Alva say like the way I quantified it when I explained it to somebody recently was you basically made Edwin Alva say the speech from The Boys season 2 that the head guy does, where he flat out says that sort of like the reverse, where in like in The Boys case it was a black man can't step out of his lane. But in this case, you have Alva saying, I'm the white man. Of course I'm going to blame you. Of course I'm going to use you as a pawn. And of course they're going to believe me. And it was just that foundational break of just finally calling out the everything and explaining the victimization on such a finite level for anyone to understand was just so groundbreaking. And it just blew me away. And like, I'll admit, kind of broke my heart that how you and Dennis kind of went, screw the secret identity. We got phones now. We don't need secret identities. I'm like, all right, that's fine. But like, it hurt my heart. But in general, I just what is it? First, I have like 3 different questions to pose because you very much like sort of encapsulate every question in a long form way, and I love that. So first thing. What is it like getting to step into the Hall of Milestone and be on that level? The second question that I have is, what is it like being able to sort of transform and transcend what was done before with these characters? And 3, what does it feel like being trusted to do this alongside being able to now, and obviously you can't talk about everything with it because of NDAs and such, but to be able to talk about the movie and be able to do that? Like, what is it like being able to be where these men were all those years ago and raise it to the next bar?
Okay, I'll be honest. Working on the Milestone books and the Milestone characters is terrifying. I'll just be honest. There's no other book that I'm working on that I'm like scared to write. That I'm like, it's time to do another script. And I'll it's for all of those reasons that you said. It's because when my father was taking me to the Fiction House, when Milestone launched. So basically, we would go to the store together, and there would be 2 stacks that would come home. There would be my stack, which was, Batman, Image, Spider-Man, stuff like that. And then there would be his stack that was the books that he liked as a kid. So Fantastic Four, Green Lantern, The Flash. So there are all of these characters that I kind of, grew up knowing as like, oh, these are Dad's comics. They're not Dad's comics, obviously, because he's not reading them. I'm reading them, but he's buying them because he used to love these characters. And so he's trying to steer me towards them, trying to, steer me away from like Cyberforce and into the Flash. And even, even in that time, I was always like a little like I would always read Dad's comics last, right?
Spider-Man, I'm reading Ted Drake first. Okay, so anyway, when Milestone came out, that became. Oh, can you still hear me?
Yeah, kind of a tone shift, but everything should be good.
Yeah, cool. I'm sorry.
There you go.
Take that part out. But of his stack, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I didn't understand. He obviously had to explain the significance of it to me. Like, I was so young and I was so new to the game that I didn't realize the notability of the Milestone comics at the time. Even though they were getting bought and I was reading them, I didn't know the larger context. Like, I didn't know how special Milestone was at the time. Like, the way what they were doing, the way the company was constructed as an imprint inside of DC Comics, which gave them, you know, kind of resources, but preserved enough autonomy for them that they felt like they could actually do things they couldn't do in DC Comics. I didn't know any of that at the time when I was just reading them and just like, oh, this is awesome. I love hardware. Like, who's this guy? You know, and then the thing too, where it's like, Dennis Cowan, who's he? What has he done before? And then that to his previous work too, just like it did with the Image guys. Like, I almost treated them, anything that had a number 1 on it, I was obsessed with, because I was like, I could have all of it. Like, I felt like I was starting the race at the same time as everyone else. So Milestone and those books were like a huge part of my relationship with comics, but I didn't understand Milestone, right? If that makes any sense.
Total sense.
And I was enjoying it, but I didn't understand it. I didn't understand how notable it was, and I didn't understand how special it was. Now, I know too much. So I know too much about Milestone, too much about the people that created it, too much about the conditions under which it was created, the conditions that made it difficult for it to exist in other, you know, certain ages. So basically Milestone, those are like the books that I know like too much about. So this was also like kind of late in the game. They came to me and they're like, first of all, they're like, do you want to pitch for hardware? And then they gave me like a synopsis of like what hardware was and like who he was. And it was because I was like, yeah. I know all of this, but you want me to pitch? Like, you want me to pitch for hardware? Like, yeah, and we need it in like a week if you can do it. Like, oh, okay. All right. So that was cool because I didn't have time to overthink it. I didn't have time to overthink what I was doing. And the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about kind of today's version of hardware was all about, again, sports analogies. It's all about who and who doesn't deserve things. So I started thinking about professional Black athletes, mostly Black quarterbacks, because I'm just obsessed with football, and how people respond to them versus how they used to respond to them like 10 years ago. So, you know, the landscape for Black quarterbacks has completely opened up and exploded, you know, I would just say like in the last decade. But I distinctly remember when it wasn't that way. I distinctly remember when this lie had been told that, you know, like, you know, the Black man didn't possess the intellect necessary in order to play quarterback. You know, quarterback is the cerebral position. Everyone else is just out there running around and crashing into each other. But the quarterback he's analyzing what he sees and he's making split-second decisions and, you know, all of these things that we had been told for so long and are still told today. Let's be real.
Honestly,
we can't do and that we don't deserve. And then also you think about how people treat athletes when they do things they don't like. You think about Colin Kaepernick. You think about, I mean, just a laundry list of like, you're fine as long as you're running around out there and throwing a ball or catching a ball and putting your, you know, your body and your ability to just, you know, walk around, you know, on the line. That's fine. But we don't want to hear anything else from you. Like, you don't deserve to have any voice or any impact past that. So that's the kind of mind state that I went into when I pitched this version of hardware. And to me, it just made so much sense that, Curtis is, the quarter for all intents and purposes. Curtis is like the quarterback of this team. Alva is his coach or his GM or whatever. These guys are having great success together. They've known each other forever. They made each other a ton of money. They have what Curtis believes is like a real relationship that is based on mutual respect and a mutual interest in each other being successful. And then, Curtis is like, hey man, I want more money. Like, hey man, I want a say in the type of players and stuff that we're, acquiring or drafting because it directly impacts what I'm doing. And Al, and what Alva's, I'm not gonna say what Alva's gonna say, but Alva's is, gonna make that face at him and is like, who told you that you were in a position to ask me for anything past what I'm giving you? And like, why do you think that would be a thing? And so that's essentially their relationship in this kind of new version of hardware. Not even new, but
retelling, as it were, for a new generation.
Yeah, right. So, and to me, the very first, I write my scripts out of order like a crazy person. Doing a script to me is it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Like, I do not write, 1 to 20 or 1 to 22. I write whatever scene that I'm kind of feeling the most. And the first thing I wrote for Hardware 1 was the scene between him and Alva. Because I felt personally that if that scene did not work, if that scene did not do what it was supposed to be doing, the whole thing would just unravel, and it wouldn't mean anything.
Okay.
So the first thing I wrote for that issue was Curtis on the roof, Alva in his office, and them just verbally sparring, and Alva being like, I made you. Like, you wouldn't be nothing. There wouldn't be a Curtis Metcalf without me. And now you're coming up on me like I owe you more. All of these things that I've given to you and all of these things that I have put in front of you, and you asking me for more and acting and getting upset when I say no.
But see, that was the crazy part about what you did there was Alva having the gall to say that when he straight up strategically picked Curtis from the what's the word I'm looking for here as I'm stuttering my life away, from the impoverishment that he had and brought him to the next level because he wanted him to feel like he was given everything. That way he would never step out of his lane. He wanted him to feel like he never had that silver spoon. He was gifted that spoon to grow. And now that the Curtis is stepping out of his lane, he's trying to sort of gaslight him into backing down, and now you're you sort of paint the double perspective of Alva in a new light. Because we saw Alva in the background of the static TV show, but no one really got to understand what Alva did unless you read the Hardware book. And now that you're fully expanding on what was done previously, it's just the overlapping of the narrative, especially now with today's current climate. You're diving headfirst into what needs to be talked about in only a couple of issues.
Thank you. It was really, to me, that felt like this is what Hardware needs to be in 2021. You can't have this relationship, and it's hidden, hopefully not too well, and all of the explosions and the running around, but there's Curtis is feeling real pain. Curtis is feeling real betrayal over this relationship that he thought was a real thing. But it was a real thing. But if the relationship only works under the terms of one person, then it's not a true it's not a true relationship. Their relationship worked fine when Curtis was doing what Alva expected him to do and not asking for anything else. And the second that he did, their entire relationship changes like on a dime. And then Curtis, and like many of us that this has happened to, or similar things have happened to, you go back and you start thinking about all of these situations that happened in the past and like, oh, is that what he was on? Then, you know, I thought it was something else. But I mean, it just really felt, I mean, you have this relationship between, you know, like an older white, you know, an older, successful, rich, affluent, privileged white dude and kind of his young, you know, black genius apprentice. And it was right there. And it just felt irresponsible in this day and age to treat their relationship as like something that is common and something that is mutually beneficial for both sides forever and ever. And it was just right there. Like to me, it felt like very low hanging fruit. And especially in this day and age that we're in, when we're dealing with disingenuousness and gaslighting and people that are obviously people that know it's like one of those things. It's like people pretend that they don't know what white privilege is. They pretend they behave as if like, I need this to be explained to me in a very clear, patient, you know, I need this explained to me very slowly and very clearly and very whatever. And then maybe I would understand and accept it. This is the best way. This is not mine. I feel like I saw someone do this maybe like in a TED Talk or something like that. So these people that claim that they don't understand white privilege, they don't understand systemic racism. It's like here's how you prove that they're liars, right? There is no, I won't say no. There are very few, you know, kind of white Americans living in this country that if someone came up to them and said, "Hey, look, would you like to make the exact same amount of money that you're making now? You're making you live in a comparable neighborhood. You have a comparable wife and children. Would you like to live the rest of your life as a black man in America? You have the same amount of money, same kind of education, same neighborhood, same family structure. Would you do that?" And 98, I won't say 98%, 99.8% of those people would say, hell no. You know why that is? Because they know what white privilege is. They know what systemic racism is. They know that they are benefiting from a system that has been propped up to protect and exalt them and degrade everyone else. So to me, it just made it would be malpractice to pretend that this was an equal relationship between the two of them. And, you know, and it was all there. It was all there in Dwayne's original issue. And I, you know, and this actually took some thought and discussion, but there's actually like a monologue, an exchange from that original issue that is in the new issue. And, you know, for a while I was like, you know, should I do it? But it's one of the most perfect monologues that I've ever read in any comic ever. And I wanted to show that what Dwayne did is universal and it translates to any age in any year. And to me, that was my way of basically saying Dwayne was right.
Well, you know, one of my greatest metaphors of what's been going on recently is we live in a world where the majority of DC Comics is white. and then to the point where and then you have like Bendis coming in and trying to like do a couple things there. But then the biggest way you can tell that no one learned from what Dwayne was saying that the Justice League was too white is when they brought Brian and Michael Bendis in, and they have the first issue of his Justice League run where the Justice League is saying that we're too white, and they hit the nail on the head again by then bringing on the black girl who's named after the guy that told us we were too white, and yet we still haven't learned our lesson after that book has come out. That tells you right there of how progress is still being halted.
Yes. So I gonna say I love Bendis and his work.
Oh no, he's amazing. It's just like that's my ultimate metaphor as to what the issue is.
There is, Miles Morales' father was named, I believe, Jefferson Davis, which is like a famous like Confederate general. So there, it basically shows you that you can't do the job with the same creators. Even the most, well-meaning, liberal, quote-unquote, knowledgeable creators can still make critical errors that no black person would ever make. No black person would have accidentally named Miles's father after a Confederate general. It just wouldn't. It just wouldn't happen. And these things are going to occur. And the thing that's really exciting to me, in this kind of the current version of, DC Comics is I'm working there. Chuck Brown is working there. John Ridley is there. Brandon Easton is there. Jeffrey Thorne, who's writing Green Lantern, is there. So I believe there is an acknowledgement that, we cannot leave this in the hands of our same kind of creative stable, not by themselves. And that's not to say that, no one gets to write, the black and brown characters but us, because that's silly. But they can't do it by themselves. And, and that's fine, right? That's not an indictment. And anytime people talk about this, they get, all up in their feelings, and they want to be, they want to just be like, are you saying, it's like, I'm saying that you can't do it in a vacuum. You have created a vacuum, and you've created an echo chamber where you are the only voices and yours is the only knowledge that is going into the creation of these books and these characters. And that's not enough. It's like you need some help. Everybody needs some help. And there is no shame, and it's not an indictment for these companies to acknowledge that, hey, you know what? If we want to have like diverse characters like in these books, and we want the fans to really gravitate toward them and feel that they're like, this is like a real, like good faith, sincere effort to kind of quote unquote change things, then we got to get some more people in here. We got to get some more people. We got to get some different writers, and we have to give them opportunities, to tell some of these stories, because we can't leave it in the hand of the most liberal, well-meaning, most well-rounded white guy that we have. Right. And that's just not with, it's not just with, diversity. It's with gender. It's with everything. So I'm hopeful, mind you. I'm not a foolish man. So I am not sitting here and saying that the job is done and
we got a long way to go.
Brandon's going to fix all of it no. But right now, these last couple of years and the years that are coming, I think will demonstrate that there is value, monetary value, in making sure that these characters are nurtured and developed and respected, right? Because here it is, and I'll try to bring it all around.
Perfect.
It took 10 years to get Miles Morales on like another screen. Well, maybe 10 years. I'm not sure when Spider-Verse came out, right? Mm-hmm. What if it took 5 years? If we have the right creators in place, if we have the right stewards of these characters, maybe it doesn't take 10 years before we can put that character into other things.
Okay.
Like, will the value in Jackson Hyde be demonstrated faster if me and Chuck are writing him versus, someone who is not Chuck or me writing him?
Right.
So that's the quicker, like I said, viability. I want Jackson Hyde to start showing up in Aquaman movies. I want him to take every form and every format that he possibly can. And that's how I approach him, and that's how I approach, all of the characters. I mean, when we're talking about, Milestone and talking about fear, a couple of things were important. When I pitched for the book, they did not tell me Dennis was going to draw it, which was the best. It was an accidental decision, I think, on their part, but it was great. If I knew that Dennis was going to draw that book, I would have fallen apart. and he would laugh. He'll laugh if, whenever he hears that story. But that's like the honest truth of it. When they said, can you pitch hardware? I was like, yeah, but I'm scared to death to do it. But I only had a very small window to get that pitch back to them, which meant that I had to trust my initial instincts. I couldn't overthink it. I couldn't just be like, oh, well, let's just, keep trying to find, like, this is what I feel about Curtis Metcalf right now. And the entire pitch was about this idea of deserving. And it was about Curtis knowing that he deserved more and Alva refusing to acknowledge that. And him pretending that everything that he's ever accomplished was because of him. Alva thinks it's him. He's the reason that Curtis Metcalf is Curtis Metcalf. And so this book is basically Curtis proving that that's bullshit. That he is Curtis Metcalf. And even if he had never met Alva, he would still be a genius. He would still be doing great things. It would just be in a different form,
right?
Maybe in a different arena. But he didn't make him. And to me, that speaks to me very personally, because, just as a Black creator, these editors are not making me, right? They're giving me opportunities that I feel my previous work has demonstrated that I deserve, right? So that's kind of how, mentally, that's just kind of how I'm approaching it. And so when it came to the animated movie, which I can't talk a ton about, obviously.
Yeah.
When the initial kind of ask went out, when they initially kind of contacted me, I'm like, oh, we're thinking about this thing. I'm thinking about DC's, previous history with their animated movies. And I'm like, oh, okay, I know what this is. I know what it is. They want to do an animated feature based on my first hardware arc. And I got all excited and I'm like, oh, there are all these things that I didn't have the space for in the comic that I could, now put in this thing, and it'll be awesome. I'm ready. So I get in front of them. We're on the phone. And so I'm just waiting. I'm like, yeah, they're going to say, hey, we want you to do, your hardware arc as an animated movie. And then they were like, I won't even say, no, we want something original.
Oh.
We want something original with multiple characters in it.
That's amazing.
And I was like, uh-oh.
Now we have to go back to the drawing board.
And I was just I thought it was something that was like so much more, and it's not small, obviously, because this will be the first, animated, not animated thing, because we have Static Shock, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Static Shock is very, very, very important to basically the stewardship of Milestone, and basically how the animated series was able to basically carry the torch, once the books were no longer around on a regular basis. So I don't want to ever diminish, the power of that animated series, because also Dwayne doing that series led to him doing Justice League, which also is like enormously important to kind of like the history and hierarchy in the mythology of like the DC animated universe.
Most definitely.
What Dwayne McDuffie gave to it and gave to these characters. But I was, emotionally at that time, I wasn't prepared. Like, I was so confident that I knew exactly what it was they were intending. And what they were intending was so much more, was so much bigger and so like more meaningful if we do it the way we're supposed to do it. And so it was pretty mind-blowing, and it is, pretty mind-blowing as we work on it. And it's amazing. It's amazing, and it's, it's humbling to have these opportunities. And more than that, it's humbling to know that I deserve the opportunity.
Most definitely.
It's humbling to know that my work, my persistence, my refusal to be killed or stopped or stymied has basically turned into this. I mean, because there was a period of time when I did not think I would ever do anything for DC Comics or DC Entertainment or whatever you want to call it, ever. And now, like 75 to 80% of the stuff I'm writing is for DC, and I'm writing an animated movie, and it's just, it's mind blowing, and it's really exciting, and I'm, thankfully I've been doing this long enough, and I'm mature enough to understand that I do deserve it. I suffer from many common writer afflictions, but thankfully, like, imposter syndrome has never been, I want to say never, but maybe, in these last kind of 5 to 7 years, there is no imposter syndrome in me, especially in regards to comics, right?
Right.
All the stuff I've said, my extensive history, in comics and with comics, I like to tell this story. I never gave up on comics. There's a lot of people that are like, oh, I discovered girls, or oh, I started drinking, and I just dropped comics. I ain't never dropped off comics. Never. Like I said, I pursued comics and girls in equal measure. Like, it was never something that like was hidden. It was never something that I was ever like embarrassed about, or that I felt like I had to hide from people. And I just feel like all of the things that I've done in comics, there is no one else that deserves to be writing comics more than me. Like, there is, if I am an imposter, if I don't belong in this space right now, then nobody fucking deserves to be in this space, because I've given and will continue to give, my, creative just output to comics, and they just, it just means so much to me. So thankfully, I don't have to deal. Maybe when I get a little further into the animated movie, maybe I'll be like, oh man, I don't know. But in comics, like, there is no imposter syndrome. There's
Excellent.
No one. There are a few people I feel in and around comics that could even form their mouth to allege that, you know, that I somehow don't deserve to be here. It's like, no, I was born to be here, and that's why I'm here.
That's perfect. I love that so much. Like,
So, yeah.
Honestly, Mr. Thomas, thank you. Like, it's crazy because like the more I've dug into what you've created, you've touched so much of what I've done and everything that I've read, and getting to talk to you and hearing your passion means the world to me. But but before I cut the recording and we finish up, I always allow like every member who comes on panel to like have a closing statement. So what would be your closing statement to the fans out there?
My closing statement to the fans, to the real comics fans, right? People that love comics, don't attack the people making comics. And
all right,
I would say to keep the faith. There are changes that are happening, not as many as there deserve to be. But you know, we're out here. We're out here and we're not going anywhere. And recently, people have waken up to the fact that they've basically been leaving talent, resources, and money on the table. And some people have decided that they want to go after that. And that mind state is why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. And don't quit. It's hard. It's impossible. But if you get to do it, it is so rewarding. And it is so exciting. And it is so fun. And you remember the difficult periods, but not that you appreciate them, but you understand them, right? Without those difficult periods, I wouldn't have been able to write Excellence. And Excellence is the one project that has just opened so many doors for me. And I'm so grateful to the people that, you know, that stood by me, you know, years before that, who were my allies before it was cool, you know, who would return my calls and my emails when they didn't have to.
Right.
And so, you know, and try to be nice to people. You know, it pays off. It pays off in brilliant and wonderful and unexpected ways. And there are people that I'm working with now that used to read my column back in like 2002 and 2003. So, you know,
most stuff.
Keep fighting and keep pushing, and don't let anybody tell you that you don't belong somewhere. And if someone taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, here's some money, write this thing," you know, you don't need any additional validation past that. These companies are not handing out money for no reason. It doesn't happen.
Right.
They're not handing out money. You know, just if they want to work with you, if they want to partner with you, there's a reason why. And always keep that in mind on the tough days.
All right, you just listened to Brandon Thomas and I shooting the breeze and talking about comic books and such because we care about this industry. As I said in the beginning, please support your local comic book shop and check out all of Brandon Thomas's work, along with great artists like Emilio Lopez, like Kari Randolph that he talked about in this brand new episode for you good folks, from their books like Excellence to their work with him on things like Aquaman, The Becoming, and the upcoming Aquamen. Please support these books because they are phenomenal pieces of work. You can check them out at a local comic book shop, or you can look at them on Comixology because you can use an affiliate link from your local comic book shop. Just ask them because they more than likely have one that you can check out with them and support them through all their endeavors. You can check this podcast out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, YouTube, Pandora, Amazon Music, and Audible. Wherever you can listen to a podcast, you can listen to us except for SoundCloud because we don't support SoundCloud. So please make sure you check us out. You can check out the podcast on Twitter at PTP_podcast, and you can check out the website on Twitter at comics_unmasked and comicsunmasked.com, where you can check out all of our latest reviews, previews, and solicitations. Thank you so much for this. We will check you guys right next time, right here at Panel to Panel. Peace out.